All right, ready to dive in. Today, we're tackling something I think we can all relate to. Finally achieving those goals we set for ourselves. You know the ones I'm talking about. We're taking a deep dive into this really popular podcast, Mindset Matters. They called the episode, Why You're Failing to Achieve Your Goals. And get this, the hosts are Emily and Mark, and they had some seriously practical tips I think you'll find super useful.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to get caught up in that initial excitement of setting a new goal. Like, this is going to be the time I finally do X, but turning that initial energy into actual lasting change, well, that's where things get tricky.
It's so true, and Emily and Mark, they start off with a goal we've probably all had at some point,
Oh.
getting fit, right?
Yo, yeah.
Who hasn't written that down with,
Mhm.
like, the best of intentions?
Te-
But they make a really good point, that kind of vague goal.
Yeah.
It's almost setting yourself up for failure.
It's almost like saying, okay, I'm going to go on a journey, but you don't know where you're going.
Exactly.
It's like, how do you know when you get there if you don't even know what the destination is? And that's where that specificity comes in.
So true. The podcast actually gave this whole framework. They called it SMART goals. Have you heard of this?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so it's specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. So instead of just get fit, it's run a 5K in under 30 minutes by December, for example.
Yeah.
Suddenly you've got a target, you've got a deadline.
It gives you those mileposts
Yes.
to tell you, okay, am I on track?
Exactly.
Mhm.
And speaking of things that can feel a little overwhelming, Emily and Mark talked about the importance of making a plan.
Oh, absolutely.
And the example they used was saving $5,000.
Ooh.
I don't know about you, but when I hear that number just kind of like floating out there,
It's a big number.
it makes me a little anxious.
It can be paralyzing.
Yes.
A lot of people get stuck in that analysis paralysis. Like, where do I even start with that?
Totally. And Emily and Mark, they stress that without a plan, without breaking that $5,000 down into like smaller, more manageable steps, it really is just a wish.
It's just a wish. It's like, oh, I wish I had $5,000.
Right.
But if you say, okay, I need to save $400 a month
Right.
for the next however many months, that becomes a lot more doable.
It feels more, it's like mapping out a road trip, right?
Exactly.
Where it's like, okay, we have our route.
You have your route, you have your stops along the way.
Yeah.
It just feels a lot less daunting.
Yes, exactly. And that's a perfect transition into the next pitfall that they talk about, which
All
is
right.
going overboard at the start.
Oh, yeah. We've all been there.
Oh, 100%. You know, that initial burst of energy where it's like, we're doing all the things, and then you burn out, like, that's it.
It's like a sugar high, right? You get that initial rush and then you crash.
The worst.
And the podcast, they use this great analogy. They talked about a tree, right?
Oh, yeah.
And how a tree grows slowly over time. You plant that seed, you nurture it consistently, and slowly it grows into this like strong, impressive tree.
Yeah.
And it's this good reminder that those consistent small actions ultimately yield much more sustainable results than going all out,
It's so true.
trying to do everything at once.
It's like we put so much pressure on ourselves to go from 0 to 60,
Yes.
when really it's about those small steps over time that make the real difference. And that actually leads perfectly into what Emily and Mark called the Mindset Matters part of this whole thing. Because we can have the goals, we can have the plan, but sometimes it's our own thoughts that can sabotage us.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
We spend so much time like thinking about those external factors, like what's my to-do list look like? What does my schedule look like? But we forget about those internal factors, which are just as important, if not more important.
Yeah, it's like we forget about the mental game.
Exactly. And, the podcast, it talks about how, like, we live in this culture of instant gratification,
Oh,
right?
tell me about it.
We want that quick fix. We want the overnight success story. And it makes it so hard to be patient because we're not seeing those results right away.
Yeah. Patience can feel like a lost art these days.
Oh, sure.
It's tough. And like you were saying, we see those highlight reels of everybody else's successes.
Mhm.
It's like, oh, well, they made it look so easy. But as Emily and Mark say, real change, it takes time.
It really does. It's a journey.
Yes, it's a journey, not a sprint. And they had this great line in the podcast. They were like, patience, young Padawan.
Yes.
I love that they brought a little bit of Yoda into it.
Little Star Wars wisdom.
But it's so true. And I think it's such a good reminder because it's easy to get discouraged. Like when we don't see those results immediately, what if instead of being discouraged, we just embrace the journey?
It's all part of the process.
Exactly. The ups, the downs. But it's funny. It's like That's easy to say, but
Yep.
sometimes that fear of failure can really creep in.
Oh, absolutely. It's real.
It's like that little voice in your head that's like, what if you're not good enough?
Hmm.
Or what if you put in all this work and you still don't reach your goal? Have you ever experienced that?
100%. I think it's such a human experience to be afraid of failing, to be afraid of not being good enough. And the podcast, they actually address that. They talk about how failure, it's not this reflection of you as a person,
It doesn't mean you're not good enough.
Exactly. They talk about it like it's feedback, it's just information.
Ooh, I like that.
It's like you tried something, it didn't work.
That-
Okay.
It's data.
It's data. So what can you learn from that experience?
I love that. It's so true. Like, if we can shift our perspective on failure, it becomes so much less scary. Instead of being this big, like, scary monster, it's just, okay, well, that didn't work. What can we learn from it?
And what can we adjust for next time?
Right.
It takes the pressure off.
Yes. So we're getting specific with our goals. We're making those plans. We're embracing the journey. We're reframing failure. What else can we do? Because Emily and Mark, they had some interesting things to say about support systems, right?
Yeah. They talk about how important it is to have people in your corner, to support you on that journey.
100%.
Yeah.
I've actually noticed that for myself, whenever I tell a friend about a goal that I'm working on, I'm way more likely to stick to it.
Yeah, it's like having accountability.
It is. Like having someone to cheer you on, but then also, maybe give you a little nudge if you start to get off track.
Right. Because it's easy to let things slide when you're the only one who knows about them.
Yeah, if no one's watching.
Exactly. But when you have that external accountability, even if it's just telling a friend, hey, this is what I'm working towards, it just makes a difference.
It really does. It's so true. Accountability can be a game changer. And you know what else can make a big difference? Habits. Emily and Mark had some really interesting things to say about the power of habits, actually.
Oh, absolutely. They even gave the example of writing a book, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like so many people, it's like a dream, right? I want to write a book someday.
It's on the bucket list.
Yeah, actually. But they talk about how it's not always about like coming up with the idea.
Right.
It's actually about like having the discipline to sit down and do it.
Yes, it's building that habit.
Yes.
Because it's so easy, right?
Yeah.
You have that initial inspiration. You're like, this is going to be a best book ever. And then, life gets in the way.
And then you're staring at that blank page.
The worst.
Yes. And so they talk about, how do you bridge that gap between the inspiration and actually making it happen?
Right.
And it's through those small habits, right?
Yeah, it's making it manageable.
Yeah. So instead of saying, I'm going to write a book, it's like, I'm going to write for 30 minutes every day.
Right, or even just 15.
Exactly.
Whatever you can do consistently.
Because those small things, they add up over time.
They really do.
Yeah.
It's like that quote. I don't know who said it, but we are what we repeatedly do.
Right.
So if we want to achieve those big goals,
Yeah.
we've got to focus on building those daily habits.
I love that. And the podcast, they really make that distinction, right? Between goals and habits.
Oh, yeah.
Goals are important, right?
It gives us direction.
They're your destination.
Yeah.
But the habits, those are your vehicle.
I love that analogy.
So it's like, okay, if you want to get to, let's say you want to get to the top of a mountain.
Okay.
Your goal is to get to the top of the mountain.
Right.
But you need the right gear. You need, the right shoes. You need the right, supplies.
It's those daily actions
Exactly.
to get you there. This is so good. Okay, so we're getting specific. We're making those plans. We're being patient. We're reframing failure. We're building support systems. We're mastering those habits.
It's a lot.
It is. But Emily and Mark had one more really important point that I want to make sure we hit before we wrap up. And it's this whole idea of motivation versus discipline.
Yeah.
Because we've all been there, right?
Yeah.
We wake up one day and we're like, yes, we're going to crush it. We're going to conquer the
I'm
world.
unstoppable.
Right. And then the next day, it's like,
I'm just going to do this one more time.
yeah. So how do we deal with that? Because motivation, it's fickle.
It is fickle. It comes and goes. And the podcast, they talk about how discipline is what you need.
It's that inner drive.
It is. It's what gets you to show up even when you don't feel like it.
It's so true.
Because you're not always going to be motivated. Let's be real.
Not even close.
So you have to have that discipline to fall back on.
It's like building that muscle,
Exactly.
the discipline muscle.
Yes.
So to kind of bring this all together, it sounds like achieving our goals. It's not just about thinking big and, aiming high. It's
Yeah.
also about getting really practical
Yes.
with the process.
100%.
It's breaking things down, building those support systems, creating those consistent habits, and remembering that even small steps when taken consistently, can lead to really incredible results.
And at the end of Mindset Matters, Emily and Mark, they encourage their listeners to share their goals, and I think we want to do something similar.
Definitely. So as you go about your day today, we want to challenge you to think about one goal that's been on your mind. And here's the key. Identify just one small habit, one tiny action that you can start doing today to move closer to that goal. Maybe it's setting a timer to work on that project for 15 minutes each evening, or maybe it's swapping out that afternoon soda for a glass of water. Whatever it is, make it small, make it doable. Because those small changes, when done consistently, they can create a ripple effect. And who knows? That one small action could be the catalyst for something truly remarkable.